Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello again. I will start with a small disclaimer or spoiler. Today we will speak about strategy in IoT. So I'm super excited. First episode we are doing about this topic. So today we have an expert, Dominik Busching, who is head of product management at Tado. And he has been working there for many years in the product side, but also comes from a background in the more traditional management consultancy and corporate strategy. So if we have time, we can explore that as well. Dominik, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nacho. Glad to be here.
Maybe to complement these few words of introduction, can you tell us more about yourself, your background, and maybe what's Tado and what's this IoT space you are working with?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So, as you already kindly mentioned, my name is Dominik Busching. I'm head of product management at Tado. Originally, actually, I'm a psychologist. So that is my very, very early background. That's what I studied. And yeah, so I've been asked a couple of times, how does a psychologist end up in product management? But actually, when I arrived in product management or when I discovered product management, then I remember being super happy to have discovered this because it's actually a pretty great fit. As a psychologist, what you learn to do is in a very structured way, understand how people tick, if you will, what their needs are, what their motivations are. You try to predict how they will behave in certain situations. You learn how to set up experiments and very structured ways to assess these things and measure these things. So it's a lot more than just lying on a couch and having a good conversation with your clinical psychologist. So, and I think for a product manager, many of these things sound familiar. That's what we try to do with customers, actually, who also happen to be human beings. So, between studying psychology and ending up in product management, I, as you mentioned, had a career in management consulting, strategy consulting. And also there are various roles that were product related already, as a product owner once, as a product manager, also product strategy in different engagements. And then in the end, I ended up at Tado. Yeah, and I've been with the company now for a little bit more than 4 years, heading the product management department here. I can talk a little bit about Tado if you want to.
Yes, maybe especially about the product we will probably discuss. So what Tado does.
Yeah, sure. So Tado is a Munich-based company. We offer smart energy management solutions that help you save energy and energy costs, reduce your energy costs. And our kind of flagship product is the Tado Smart Thermostat. That's a hardware device. Actually, that's how it looks like for people who are watching the video. Looks pretty slick, simple, lean. That's our design philosophy. And there's a smartphone app, also a web app that you can use then to control your heating at home. So what a smart thermostat does is you replace your analog wall thermostat. Or another product that we have is the smart radiator thermostat that replaces the knobs that you can rotate that you find on your radiators. And then you control your heating from everywhere in the world. But not only that, also our smart algorithms then help you reduce your energy consumptions, control the heating in a very smart way that saves energy and saves costs. On average, 22% for our customers. And so for you as the customer, you can then enjoy the warm comfort of your home without having to worry about your consumption. And I think this became increasingly relevant in the previous 12 months when somebody decided to invade Ukraine and created this massive crisis in the world and also this massive energy crisis. So energy costs have skyrocketed for people, and we have seen an equivalent demand increase in our products over the last couple of months.
Interesting. By the way, this is fully B2C, right? So fully to consumer.
Yes. At this point, yes. We are exploring options, but actually, I think so. For this core product, I would say yes, it is. We sell through various channels, but besides this hardware product, we also have a premium subscription that we sell in the App Store. That's also B2C product, but we also have a B2B SaaS. That's called Tado 360. That's a remote boiler monitoring solution, so that helps heating installation companies who have connected their customers, let's say gas boiler with the Tado. They can then remotely monitor the performance of this boiler. They see if something breaks down. They will know about this before the customer knows, so they can drive out to the customer, bring the right spare parts, have it fixed in a couple of hours, where typically when your boiler breaks down in the winter, will take you a couple of days until you have a warm home again.
Interesting. Good. Okay, perfect. But I think that's a great time to just jump into the nuts and bolts of your strategy creation. So as anticipated, we start by asking, when was the last time you encountered this challenge of creating strategy? This very interesting space, but maybe talking about what was the process, the steps or frameworks you used along the way.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So actually, it's not that long ago. We kicked off the last strategy process around a good year ago, I would say. Probably pretty much a year ago. Coming out of a organizational transformation where we transformed our product organization from a functional setup where we had like an engineering function, a design function, product management function, kind of next to each other, not in silos. People talk to each other, but pretty much running independently. And we transformed this to a setup of cross-functional product teams, both in the in the hardware and the software or apps space. And that led to also our design and engineering colleagues being much more focused on the customer and taking a much stronger product perspective than before. Before they really were focused on some systems and tools that they were owning. I'm talking about engineering, right? So some particular service that ran in our backend. And now they suddenly also were owning a product. So more and more people also in the development organization were asking about, hey, where is this going long term? What's our strategy? I think when engineers and designers ask that question, that's you can congratulate yourself. That's perfect. Yeah, I love that. So that kind of helped kick this off. And I have to say, I think there has always been some sort of product strategy at Tado, but not in this kind of formalized form, right? It was not written down, not in an asset that you could share with people.
Just a small interruption. What were the cues that, or the hints that let you know that there was a strategy there, but it was just not kind of written in the past?
So we are our company is still has both its founders on board. So it was founded 12 years ago, 2011. And when you talk to these guys, they have a pretty clear understanding and pretty clear vision where all of this is going. because they have been there from day one, when they were the only two people. And if you would have asked them, and I did, then of course they said, yeah, sure, there's a strategy. I can explain it to you, right? Okay, great, then please do. Let me write it down. And of course, there's then a lot of understanding and a lot of target picture is there. But when you really try to write it down, and then you realize strategy means focus, and focus means saying yes to some things, no to other things, then you realize that it's actually worth putting this on paper, because that kind of surfaces the contradictions sometimes, or the areas where things are a little vague. But just to answer your question, long story short, by asking or talking a lot to these guys and also to our management, it was clear there is some sort of strategic understanding. It's maybe a better term.
Perfect. And by the way, just two questions: how big is Tado and how old is Tado?
Yeah, so founded 2011, so we are 12 years old at some point this year, I think. And 200 people roughly, give or take.
Okay, perfect. Good. Excellent. Okay, then now fast forward again. Engineers and designers asking what's our strategy?
Yeah, back from our tangent to the original question. So I can talk about the format, the structure, framework, and also the process a little. So in terms of the format, the way we formalized what was in people's heads is the kind of a written narrative, which I'm actually a big fan of. Not everybody likes to read text, but I mean, the whole kind of, it feels like every process at Amazon kind of rests on this 5 or 6 pager, right? So they do this a lot and quite successfully, and I appreciate that format also for a couple of reasons. And most importantly, I think when you write a narrative, you cannot lie to yourself. Logical flaws are very quickly very apparent, whereas you can hide them in if you are in a, let's say, in a PowerPoint presentation with a nice graph and charts and fancy pictures. You can hide your vagueness good. So this is kind of a text that people can read and that they can understand and say, hey, okay, I understand this. So that's the framework or the format. And the high level structure of this is something like, basically, hey, we have there's a target picture, the world in 5 years, how we imagine it. There's this current situation that we are in right now. And then there is a part that tells us how to get there. So first do this, then do this.
Got it. And maybe you said that this is 1 year ago. So do you have in mind any period of time you were creating this strategy for?
In our case, it's a 3-year time period.
Okay.
Yeah, and the idea is that we update this once a year, at least. Like, or at least once a year, have a proper review process for this that we have now also started recently. And then in between, if something dramatically changes, let's say the ownership structure of the company and there's a new corporate structure, then this will obviously also affect product.
And by the way, I mean, you mentioned 3 years of strategy, but do you have some kind of goals tied to this written narrative or some sort of expectation in kind of metric impact or anything like
that? You mean some KPIs that kind of measure in how far we achieve this?
Yeah.
So what we do is we have a pretty clear understanding what our key metrics are that we want to optimize against. I can just name you one: energy savings and energy cost savings. This is the key value parameter that we think is essential for our customers. Yeah.
Okay.
While keeping their comfort level constant, but that is harder to measure.
Yeah, got it. Makes sense. Okay, but I would like to ask then a bit more about the process. So, how did you get to this written narrative? Where do you start?
Yeah, sure. So, as I say, target picture, and then where do we stand today, and how do we get there? So, start with the target picture. What do you think the world will look like in 3 years? I mean, our relevant world, the context that we have to compete and operate in. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
I think different people in the company have different expectations towards that. You have to identify the main relevant trends. To give you an example, in our domain, it's the electrification of heating. So today everybody's using fossil gas boilers, but now you might have heard more and more people switch to electric heat pumps. Yeah, that significantly changes the energy landscape and also our business model. Yeah, and so you can think about, okay, how fast is this transition going? Do we believe this is actually happening? Based on this trend, how will the situation look like, the competitive playing field in 3 years? And of course, not all of that has to be answered by your product strategy. A lot of that is actually defined in the company strategy. And luckily, we have a also pretty crisp company strategy, and that's a good starting point, right? Because in the end, product strategy needs to deliver into the company strategy. Yeah. So I need to answer the question, what products do we have to build in the next 3 years to deliver on that company strategy? And for that, I need to answer, okay, what customer problems do we have to solve in the next 3 years with these products?
Yeah, and maybe two questions related to that. The first one is, what are the sources of information for this sort of kind of trends, and or how do you come up with the trends? Basically, where do you go look them? And the second one, and maybe related to what you're saying, this corporate versus product strategy, is I assume that in this very particular space, the technology trends might be important. So what's not possible with the advancements in the technology?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Both really good questions. So, um, what sources of information do we draw on? So there are, I mean, first of all, we do a lot of our own research. So we have a quite sizable customer base already. So we have more than 3 million smart thermostats in the field that we are operating that talk to our server every day. If we look at how they behave over the last 2 or 3 years, there are certain trends that we can already see. Trends, for example, also how the different heating setup types in different countries in Europe, for example, how they evolve over time. And there are clear trends that you can gain from that. That's one thing. But of course, we read market reports. I expect every product manager in my team to be on top of the latest statistics and trends that you can just find out about through market research. There's one particular research agency that we rely heavily on. It almost appears like they exist to produce just information that is relevant for us. So that's really great. But that's an important source.
Yeah. And do you collect this? Because I mean, you mentioned one that seems to be kind of super heavy and super important for your strategy, but I assume that will be nuggets of information here and there
Yes.
that you are constantly collecting. So do they live in somewhere?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we have a like many scale-up startups these days, we work with here Google Workspace, and so basically it's super easy to make information and data accessible throughout the company. So there are shared drives that kind of host all this information, and we also actively encourage not just our product managers or people kind of working on strategic questions to regularly check these things out. So we also our engineers and our designers read market reports sometimes, and they understand these things. Yeah.
Mhm. But do you distill the kind of the nuggets of information that are relevant to you? So what I'm trying to get to is, as a product manager, I'm constantly reading this information. But
Yeah.
of course, I can just kind of download the report and put it in our drive. But I come up with, okay, this is the piece of the report that is important for us.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to get to is, do these sort of kind of insights or decision points or whatever how you call it, do you summarize them somewhere, or is more like, hey, we are building this shared understanding by being exposed to this information?
Um, it depends. So yes, sometimes we do that uh, for very particular use cases. So let's say, for example, what we do that's kind of the 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 lowest level strategic asset that we produce, I would say, is what we call an NPI analysis, a new product introduction analysis. So
Okay.
that's typically something we do on the hardware side before we introduce a new piece of hardware, a new device that needs to live in that ecosystem. There's quite a big analysis on competitors, on relevant market statistics and market trends. Then we deep dive into all these sources and extract the relevant statistics and build our own model and business case around it. And that's, I think, when some of them kind of surface as a really nicely as a report that everybody can digest easily. But apart from that, we just encourage to kind of
Yeah,
continuously
great.
update themselves.
Okay, perfect, got it. Okay, so I think that we cover how you create your target picture, which is kind of by understanding these trends.
Mm-hmm.
Who will you say, I was going to say collaborate, but mostly or owns or defines this target picture? So because you mentioned this interaction between corporate strategy and product strategy, I guess that the how the world will look like in 3 years is more of a shared understanding. So I guess that is kind of more on the corporate side.
Mm-hmm.
So who participates in these discussions, or who owns the kind of final definition of what we believe in?
Yeah. So in our case, that is really an executive management task.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
um, this will be typically heavily be driven by our founders, predominantly by one of them. The kind of one is more technically leaning, our CTO. One is more market and strategy leaning, our CPO, Christian. And they will drive this. But of course, we also have a CEO. They hired him, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. He joined the company as an experienced executive to kind of scale and drive the ship. And in this executive management team, they are in the end responsible for saying, okay, this is what we believe in. Yeah, this is the North Star that we are running towards.
Perfect. Okay, got it. So we have the definition, and then you mentioned the next step maybe is doing the where we are at today. Is that
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So just to give you an example, right? So if we say, hey, in 3 years' time, the heating landscape will be dominated by heat pumps. It probably won't. That it's not going that quickly. But let's just, for the sake of the argument, assume that. But then we look at today. Hey, okay, today still most people are using fossil fuel-driven gas boilers, right? So doesn't make sense to flip the switch today and focus all our efforts and all our energy and all our products on electric heating. Yeah, then we probably would be out of business soon, and our core bread and butter business, which is still relying on these systems, would not work anymore. So that's important to have that understanding. Yeah. So what drives our revenue and our business today? And then we also need to understand what do we need to get good at, in 3 years? What do we have to be good at in 3 years? Are we already good at this today? In certain areas, yes. So there are some strengths that we can leverage. In other areas, not at all. We have to build this up from scratch. So how will we do this? Also here, I think company strategy, product strategy blur a little bit, because I think this kind of capability gap is maybe not something that you would typically find in a product strategy, but you can then apply it to your product world, because hey, let's say if you want to build a heating algorithm that works for a heat pump, it's clear that you have to do certain things on the product side very differently, and that's where your innovation then has to happen.
Okay, perfect. But maybe complementing I'm trying to get to the how do we find these kind of sure if we call it gaps, because maybe not all of them are gaps, but maybe kind of the areas of investment or things that we need to do.
Yeah.
So what are the ways to explore this space?
You mean how do we find out what we are? How do we find the unknown unknowns, so to say? So what we are not yet good at.
Interesting way to put it, but because I don't want to focus necessarily on the gaps, but I assume that maybe going back to what you were saying is kind of this is the situation we are at today, which kind of tells us what we're going to do. So this, what I would call diagnosis, I want to put kind of bias you with my words, but this diagnosis, how is it done?
Yeah, good question. I think that's actually not overly formalized, to be honest. I think also don't forget we are not that big corporate ship yet, right? So I think both for corporate strategy and for product strategy, you can fit all people that need to come together to create that into one room. Yeah. And also I think we have a pretty clear and good intuitive understanding of where our strengths currently are and where we lack capabilities that we need to build up. If you have built that big of a domain knowledge and domain expertise in, let's say, the heating space, as we did over the last years, it's just obvious where we are still lacking behind.
Yeah, perfect. But maybe then fast forwarding to the end, when we are writing the thing out is, or we can go back to this 1 year ago when you are doing it. Is this something that will be, as you were saying, hey, we sit in the room, we say, let's kind of write down the things that the capabilities we need to build, or is there anything behind that I don't know, maybe marketing will say, hey, we're lacking this channel, and product will say we're lacking this capability, or how do you kind of collect this input?
Overall, I would say through many coffee breaks with the relevant people in the company. So I think there is no magic workshop framework that we successfully applied that I could share here now, right? So it's really...
That's fine. No, that's perfect. I mean, I don't like to over-engineer it either, so I was more kind of curious about how you did it.
Yeah, so...
Coffee chats are perfect.
But I think what is still important to point out is that you have to have them, right? You have to speak... marketing has a relevant opinion. The sales team has a relevant opinion. Actually, it's not great input, but it helps. I mean, relationship between product management and sales, I think, is kind of, there's a natural friction in every company. Maybe that's even healthy sometimes. But having a product strategy that you have maybe not co-created, but at least kind of somehow collaborated on and have alignment on, that helps tremendously to have better discussions and alignment with sales going forward. Because, and I also credit to our sales team here that I hear our head of sales regularly making the argument, no, that's not an opportunity we're going to pursue. That's not in line with our product strategy. We're not going to do this. Wow, that I'm happy when I hear this. Exactly. Applause. So yeah, they should be involved. And our marketing team, for example, they own our brand strategy. So of course, the product propositions we develop, they have to be, as they call it, on brand in the end. They cannot conflict with our brand, because our brand is especially also for us, it's a super important and valuable asset for the company that we don't want to endanger.
And maybe now that we are digging into this space, when you were sitting down 1 year ago creating this, it was purposefully creating a product strategy, or was coming from and says, hey, let's put the company strategy in place and then the product strategy spawned out of it? Or how do you decide that you even need to artifacts out there?
No, it was really a purposeful decision to write down a dedicated product strategy. We around the same time, driven by an kind of, so on the company level, we made a significant strategic shift a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. We acquired an energy company. So I didn't talk about this in the introduction, but so we are not just an IoT company anymore. We also are a utility, an energy provider now. So you can buy an electricity tariff from Tado, or it's still running under this other brand that we acquired. Anyways, so that triggered lots of rethinking on the company strategy level, and then there were also lots of documentation and kind of strategic assets produced, and that gave us a great starting point and great input for product strategy. But that, of course, then followed logically, because hey, now we have acquired this new asset, and we have this new company strategy. Just building smart thermostats for the rest of our lives, that doesn't work anymore, right? We need to respond to that. We need to adjust. Hence, this process was kicked off.
Okay, interesting. So I guess the need was also clear for the product strategy. Yeah, okay, we can consider that. So maybe the next thing I was kind of thinking of, going back to the process we were discussing, is, okay, we're having this diagnosis, but probably there are more things in there or maybe just to use your words, we need to focus, right? We need to say yes to some things and we no to the rest. So how was the process of selecting the areas you will focus on?
Yeah, so I think there you can really apply some good old-fashioned company strategy, or like just corporate strategy tools. Yeah, and I think there are really good frameworks around this. I don't know, like BCG matrix. I love 2x2 matrices. What's the English plural for that? Yeah, I really like those. Also in product management, effort impact matrix, one of my favorites. So here you basically do what's in the upper right corner, right? So you have you think about where are you good at, where do you have a strong right to win, what is an attractive customer segment or market segment, and then you can, if you have defined this, then you think about, then you know where to play, yeah, and then you can think about, okay, how to win in that segment. What customer problems do we have to solve to win over the people in that segment? Yeah, but in the end, of course, everybody has opinions, and you can imagine in a company that size, yeah, with founders still on board, also a strong CEO, very strong opinions sometimes. But in the end, everybody wants to make the right decision, and this is when you bring data in, and data can be ambiguous, but it typically doesn't lie. Yeah, so it's hard to argue against that, which is why these types of decisions are really in the end made on data, and that means like on a solid business case.
Perfect, good. what I'm thinking about is kind of so you mentioned heavily the how to win framework,
Mhm.
and you have this need for, I would call it differentiation, but maybe kind of I will write you mentioned maybe it's better to say where can we win. So for in the competing landscape that you are playing with, it's more like selecting the size of the opportunity, or more about, hey, these are the things that we can kind of the advantages we can defend, and this is how we are selecting.
It's a combination, right? So if the size of an opportunity is really small, but you're really good at it, then it still might not make
Mhm.
sense to pursue it, and vice versa, right? The opposite is also true. So I think you need to find kind of the sweet spots between, or the combination between those, um, where you can say, hey, where is what's the given given our capabilities and strengths, um, what is the biggest value that we can capture? And that is kind of the multiplication, the,
Yeah,
of
got it.
the product of these two things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, got it. Very, very good. And one last question around data that you mentioned is maybe, I mean, you said that it can be ambiguous, but maybe just if you have an example or something we can rely on. When we are saying, hey, we are strong or weak in this area,
Hmm.
can be a bit fussy to define. Can be, as you said, maybe opinionated argumentation. So how do you kind of go through these discussions or bring data to these sort of questions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, to be really honest, uh, I think this is also where your entrepreneurial risk at some point kicks in. Yeah, this is the entrepreneurial bet that you make at some
Yeah.
point, that you think, hey, given the people that work here, given our track record in the past, and how successful we've been with this type of products, or like initiatives, we just have confidence that we can pull this off, that we can also win in this area. That sounds and smells like something that we would be good at. Yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, if you have uh, zero indicators or data to back that up, then maybe you should better sober up and not do this. But as you said, right, it's ambiguous, and then I think yeah, that's a leap of faith and a judgment call that you make in
Yeah.
this case.
Yeah, and maybe this is where I think make it interesting with IoT, because in normal scenario you say, "Hey, this is my strategic bet," and then you go, you test the hypothesis, you can maybe run somewhat of a say cheap experiment, and you kind of get some more data. In the IoT world, would you say the same is true? I assume that the kind of getting kind of the first results is a bit harder because you need to actually build this product in full.
Um,
So how have you experienced that?
yes. So in principle, you're exactly right. It's it's two worlds. Also in development and the whole discovery process, same principles, but very different boundary conditions. So in hardware, you have um, much fewer degrees of freedom. Yeah, because at some point there is a point of no return, and that's when you start mass production, and the factory churns out like millions of devices, then you cannot go back. You have still a little bit of wiggle room on the firmware side of things that you can update over the air, especially in IoT.
Mhm.
Um, but the plastic box is then out on the shelves, yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, but that said, there are still ways, and we also we try to kind of use innovative methods as much as we can to still remain in agile world as long as you can before you hit that mass production button. And for example, you can 3D print stuff today. Yeah, just a random example. You can work with digital prototypes that you can share with people. We had a just this week we had a fantastic product demo by one of our product teams, that basically they had a physical prototype put in front of a customer, but then the kind of the display and stuff that was not yet working. So they put an iPhone next to this customer and where they mocked kind of the device display and said, just imagine that is running on this little display and interact with this Figma prototype. And that worked quite nicely. It helped to validate the assumption that we wanted to validate without building the final thing. Yeah, and you can pull tricks like that.
Okay, so it's about being smart with your discovery, I guess.
Exactly. And look at, for example, companies like SpaceX. Yeah, they are doing this with orbital rockets. Yeah, at scale, and they are still quickly iterating. Yes, they're also throwing a lot of money on the problem, but yeah, they iterate the product and the production process in parallel. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, true. Okay, then I guess that the final step I have in mind for the process is how do you sequence the things you need to do, right? So we you tell me how you select the things, but when we were talking about the narrative, we say, hey, first this, then that. So is there any background for that decision?
Yeah, I think in the end it's a little bit common sense. So, but I can give you an example to illustrate what I mean. So, let's say our ultimate customer problem that we want to tackle is you as a customer think energy is too expensive, you cannot afford it, you want to save energy. Yeah. So then we try to break this down into different problems that we have to solve. And when we lay those out, then it's sometimes pretty clear what has to come first and what has to come second. And in this case, we think that just two out of the many problems that we think we need to tackle is we need to make it more transparent. So basically the assumption is you don't save because you don't understand how your behavior, like heating behavior at home, affects costs. So just to give you an example, do you know how much a hot shower costs you?
I have no idea. I feel totally represented by what you said.
Yeah, exactly. You probably don't, most people don't even know. I mean, everybody listening to this can ask themselves, do I know how much I spent on heating last year in total? Like just roughly. Chances are you just don't know. And that, don't be embarrassed. Nobody does. So, and opening that black box, we think that is the first step. Yeah. And only then the next problem to tackle is, okay, now that you understand that, how can we help you change your behavior? So how can we give you easy levers to pull to change that, right? And maybe some of those are then not for you. Some of them are more useful. But yeah, start with transparency and then at the behavioral changes later.
Okay, Dominik, this has been wonderful. You gave me all the walkthrough, so I will just throw you my usual closing question, which is what I'm not asking. What's some maybe interesting learning about strategy that you have along the way that I didn't cover in my questions?
That's a good question. So I think what I find particularly interesting or maybe interesting to share for your listeners in IoT is that I think we touched on it a little bit, but these different worlds of software and hardware that move at completely different paces also have way different planning horizons. Getting those on, like how to get those on the same page, I think that's quite interesting and tricky. And have we completely solved this problem? No, but I think we have found ways that work well enough for us in a mix of how we set up our organization, how these two worlds cooperate or collaborate with each other on a day-to-day basis through things like a joint OKR process, like joint weekly tactical meetings where everybody meets and aligns through a kind of creating a one shared product development organization that everybody is part of, not two different worlds that have an interface. No, like we are one development organization, and then everybody goes back to their teams. But also in strategy, that's not an easy feat because one thing you need to kind of plan 2 years in advance, and the other things you can change on a 2-week basis. So that's interesting. Yeah. So if you're interested to work in such an environment, you know where to find me, hopefully.
Perfect. Yeah, and maybe that's a good segue to a typical closing. It also has been wonderful. Thanks for being so open and share all this nuggets of information with us. Where can people find you, or any message that you want to point the audience to?
I think easiest is LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/Dominik-Busching. Dominik with a K.
Perfect. Oh, that's an easy one. Any closing remarks, or if not, I really appreciate all the things that you shared today with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me today, Nacho. Was a pleasure talking to you, and it's interesting to listen to your episodes because a lot of the things that are being discussed there really resonate with me. Especially, I think focus, strategy is all about focus and about not saying yes to things, but saying no to the million other things that you are not doing, that you're deciding against. And I heard this over and over again in your podcast. We have the same issues.
We face the same challenges, right? Okay, Dominik, thank you so much, and talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.